Today, if you have clicked on this video, that is highly because you have consumed some sort of podcast content. You would be surprised to know that more than 50% of the podcast viewers sleep half the way through watching a podcast, meaning they do not even watch the podcast completely. But spending so much of your time on watching a podcast and not completing it is not something that smart people do, right? So, me being an avid podcast consumer, I have consumed audio podcasts as well as video podcasts. If today I have to share with you 5 tips by which you can actually gain out of listening to a podcast where we spend so much of our time, the first one being download the podcast that you actually want to see. I highly recommend that instead of watching a podcast live, you download the podcast. What happens is once you download the podcast, it is available for your view anytime. So you don't have to wait for a proper internet connection, or you don't have to worry about the unnecessary notifications that you will be getting or the unnecessary pop-ups that you have. So downloading the podcast and listening to it, it gives you a sense of commitment that yes, now I have the podcast ready with me. I can spare whatever time I want and listening to it without any distractions. I usually prefer listening to podcast. If I'm at my home, I'll prefer that I listen it over a desktop or a laptop. I prefer not to watch podcasts over mobile phones because of the constant irritating notifications or some calls that you get. But the tip around here is that if you're watching a podcast on your mobile phone, switch off all the notifications that you expect to receive and put your mobile on DND. What happens is majority of the distractions is eliminated this week. Second one being, this is the most important, this is the heart of watching a podcast for me. Get a notebook and a pen. Get a notebook and a pen. Grab any notebook, grab a notepad, be it a piece of paper, whatever you have, but grab it. Whenever you're listening to a podcast, you actually want to get something out of it. The average retention that we have is we anyways forget 80% of what we hear almost immediately. What I want you to do is whenever you watch a podcast, whenever you are committed to sitting and watching a podcast, grab yourself a pencil, a pen, or a notepad and start writing down whatever you feel sticks with you, whatever you feel is, oh, this is something new that I heard, or this is something very unique to this person. You can start writing that down. My third point, start making highlights. Whatever are the highlights of the video that you see, whatever is the new information that you see, that oh, this is something that I've heard for the first time, or if you miss out on any information, pause the video, rewind the video, rewatch it, learn from it, and articulate for yourself. This is the beauty of having a recorded podcast for yourself. In this age and time, we are blessed with having such good media platforms wherein you can actually pause, rewind, rehear, and understand what the crux of the matter is. The fourth point being self reflection. At the end of the podcast, assuming that you have spent around 60 minutes listening to this podcast, you might have listed down at least say 10 points that or 10 highlights that you understand, oh, this can be important, or this is something that I heard for the first time. Now you can shortlist that to what you feel can add value to your day-to-day life. You can incorporate that into your own routine and understand how this actually helps, or how can that actually add value to your own understanding. Because after spending 60 minutes of your time on a particular social media platform, I don't think you should be left with how you started, or even worse, wasting your time. So if you listen to a very good podcast, you try to understand whether this value aligns with me or not. Basis that, what we do is first we take up new values. We have a repository of the understandings that we have done. We have a whole note of, if you are a person who watches like one podcast a week, at the end of the month you have notes from 4 podcasts that you have watched. Now that acts as a repository of whenever you sit with yourself, whenever you're journaling, or whenever you're talking to your friends, you get that repository of information, you get that repository of values to talk about, to incorporate, so on and so forth. The list is endless. The fifth point that I would like to highlight here is, and now this is optional, now this should not stop you from watching a podcast. The fifth point here, big. You can do this exercise with a friend. You can form a group. You can select a certain podcast, download it, keep a committed time, say Saturday afternoon, watch it, make notes, and start discussing the values that you have learned or the information that you have gathered amongst yourself. What this does is that when amongst friends they know you better, they can also give you constructive criticism. The prime motive of me making this video was to understand that whenever you watch a very long podcast, it is highly probable that we forget most of it. This is how you harness what podcasting topic is available at the end of it. Whichever podcast you watch or whichever channel you follow, do consider giving that podcast a like and a comment so that the community flourishes. People come to know that yes, this is a good podcast, this can be listened to. So I do hope that you liked the video. If you did like the video, please press the like button. If you want more such informative videos, please encourage me by hitting on the subscribe button. Do share it with your friends who love podcasting, and do share me good podcasting videos that you have watched in the comment section below. So thank you.